Yeah, so that's the first good thing, and make sure you silence your cell phones. We'll see whether we can make that worth your while. Faith and doubt is obviously a crucial subject in our civilization today, or lack of civilization, when the faith is questioned and when doubt is feared or doubt is embraced. We need to understand better what these realities, what these terms mean, what the relationship is to each other. Hopefully during the next 5 weeks we'll get a better picture of that. And this course was not my idea. It was actually suggested by Father Xavier, who's in charge of the adult faith formation here. Thought it would be a good topic for me, a good topic for you, and I hope you find that to be the case. I mentioned in the brochure that we'd be looking at ancient and modern, secular and religious, East and West, and we will. What I'm going to do today is focus on the traditional theological Catholic sequence of events and evolution of understanding, or evolution of presentation of what faith is, to see where we got where we are today. And on a pastoral level, I mean, too. Certainly the idea, and was pretty much an idea sometimes, simply, of faith that I was trained in, had a lot left to be desired. But to show you just what we're facing, and what the tradition on the pastoral level brought us to, as I was preparing for this, by sheer wonderful providential arrangement, one of my own parishioners up in Notre Dame, an older woman who was from St. Lucia in the Caribbean, has been here many years, but from that British tradition, therefore, she's been using for the past 45 years, and that's great. I mean, she has a vademecum, something that can help her along her path of faith. And she showed it to me. The Catechism of Christian Doctrine, in a few pages, the basic truths, etc. Approved by the Archbishops and Bishops of England and Wales, and directed to be used in all the dioceses. Revised edition 1971. So this is actually even after the Council, okay? Put out by the Catholic Truth Society in London. But the few paragraphs, the few sentences they have on faith at the beginning of chapter 2 are very, very telling. And we're going to be looking into how we got here. What is faith? Faith is a supernatural gift of God. Okay, that's one of the main things we're going to be talking about. It's supernatural and a gift of God, according to the Catechism here, which enables us to believe without doubting. Now, there's the hook, eh? Which enables us to believe without doubting whatever God has revealed. Okay, whatever that is. Second question. Why must we believe whatever God has revealed? You've got to watch out. Why do we have to do this? I must believe. It's a gift, but you have to. I must believe whatever God has revealed because God is the very truth. And can neither, this is a favorite phrase that I grew up with, the very truth, and he can neither deceive nor be deceived. So you can't go wrong if God is revealing this, because he is the truth and can't deceive or be deceived. And here's the real kicker, the third question, the last one here that I'm going to be talking about. How are we to know what God has revealed? I am to know what God has revealed by the testimony, teaching, and authority of the Catholic Church. Okay, so God is the truth, and he's revealing, through the Church. And by the way, just as an addition to that, who gave the Catholic Church divine authority to teach? Notice it's divine authority. So Jesus Christ gave the Catholic Church divine authority to teach when he said, go and teach all nations, Matthew 28. So whatever we might think of this, and we're going to be unpacking this over the next weeks, and I hope a good deal of it already today, all those elements, of the truth that God has revealed, taught by the church, which is a supernatural gift, we must believe, etc. How we reach that point from what faith is presented as, for example, in the scriptures. We'll start with that. But this is really important, because this is where the rubber hits the road. This is what real people and their genuine, everyday spiritual journeys, like my parishioner here, are reading and needing and trying to use to understand their faith. So, we need to address what's spoken of here. Obviously this is not false, but we really need to unpack it and understand, how we got here and what is it really saying, what should it really be saying to us today. So, let's go back to the beginning of we can talk about the Old Testament too, these Hebrew scriptures, but let's focus on the new. We speak about faith. What Jesus asks of the people he heals, for example, one of his followers is faith. Have faith. Oh, you have little faith. Have faith. What is he talking about? Now, the words that are used, the word pisteo in Greek, from which you get the word pistis in Greek, it means basically trust. So, did you believe? Yes, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Jesus is not asking that he be confessed as the second person of the Blessed Trinity, the Son of God. Most likely, Jesus didn't think of himself in those terms at all in his human consciousness. Much less, was that demanded of the people he helped. What he was asking for was trust. Can you entrust yourself to the goodness of God working through me, through the power of God working through me? You believe that God is on your side. You believe that I can do this for you. So that's what faith, means. If you look at faith, even that you have faith, and we'll speak about this more next week for the secular understanding of faith according to a modern work. It's your trust. You have faith in somebody or something. It's only good if it's only yourself. You have faith in. You're trusting in something. You're going beyond, the immediate situation. And fides is the word in Latin. Confide, bona fide. All these words that we use come from that, and it means the same thing. Confide means to trust. So you can give yourself over to someone or something. And that's biblical New Testament faith. For Jesus, in his rubber hits the road kind of ministry, simply have faith, in the power of God working through me. He's not asking for a profession of faith in the sense of a creed. He's not, in fact, the writer Richard Rohr, the Franciscan, just pointed that out in an email today. He's not asking for any kind of doctrinal or moral purity on the part of anybody that he's dealing with. That's not a requirement for the action of God working in that person, for that salvific healing activity to be at work. All it is surrender. Kind of come forward in your poverty, trust in me, trust in the power of God working in me, and wonderful things will happen. That's the faith. That's why Jesus keeps saying, go your way, your faith has saved you. He says it many times. To the Syrophoenician woman, to the woman who bathes his feet with her tears, etc. It's your faith that saved you. And then notice he doesn't even say, I saved you. Or the power of God working through me saved you. He says, your faith saved you. That your faith, your openness, your trust was the vehicle through which, the channel through which this power could operate. That's how powerful it is. That attitude. So we always have to go back to that, and we'll see how we kind of moved and steered in another direction as time went on. Now, we want to speak about faith, in the New Testament. Now, obviously, Paul speaks the most about faith. His whole treatise, especially to the Romans, is about faith in the sense that by grace and by faith we are saved, and not by works of the law. So that whole vision of faith as, yes, trust and commitment to Jesus, beyond whatever works or merit you might possibly think you have. And I was saved by his grace and by faith. That's the meaning of faith, you know, for Paul. But if you're looking for the most influential, in terms of historical theology in the West, if you're looking for the most influential definition of faith, you'll go to the 11th chapter of the letter, what we call the letter to the Hebrews. That first line, or the first couple lines here, the first line, first verse of chapter 11, which we're going to look at in detail, is the most influential definition of faith in our Catholic theological history. So what is it? And by the way, this whole chapter, well, I'll say that in a minute, the whole very, very long chapter 11 of Hebrews is on faith and on, especially about those who manifested faith throughout salvation history, beginning with Cain and Abel, right, going all the way through. And I'll comment more on that in a minute. But here's the definition. And it's the most elegant Greek by far in the New Testament is what we call the letter to the Hebrews, which isn't a letter, it's a theological treatise addressed to Jews, probably Alexandrian Jews, sophisticated Greek-speaking Jews who were very much into allegory, etc. in Alexandria, so it might have been written by Apollos, etc. Point being, it's really tough to know how to translate some of these words. There's very, very dense phrasing here. So let's try it. I'll give you various English translations which we use today. So faith is, looks like the substance of things that we hope for, of things to be hoped for. Hypostasis is the word in Greek. It's literally hypostasis, means substance, which means standing under. So substance is a transliteration practically of the word substance. So faith is the substance, but hypostasis is a word which is used later in theology to mean the one hypostasis, a person. Although the word originally means substance, so it gets all mixed up in later theology. But here it's used for using the substance of what we hope for. What do we mean? What do you mean the substance of what we hope for? How is faith the substance of what we hope for? We'll see what St. Thomas Aquinas says about that in just a second. How he understands that. And this is the second part of the definition. It's the conviction or the argument, the case for things unseen, invisible, for the invisible things. So it's the substance of what is hoped for, of things hoped for, and is the conviction of the argument, the case for things that are unseen. Elenkos, conviction, argument, case, a legal term, as you can see, and it's sometimes translated argument, and sometimes conviction. Conviction more in the sense of I'm convinced rather than I'm convicted. Right? But these are some of the translations that I used that I looked up. So the New Revised Standard. Faith is the assurance, not just the substance, but the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. The Revised English Bible. Faith gives substance to our hopes. That's an interesting way of translating it. The substance of things hoped for. Faith gives substance to our hopes and convinces us of realities we do not see. The New American Bible, which we use in our liturgy here, faith is the realization, substance in that sense, realization of what is hoped for, and evidence. So it's not just the case or the argument or the conviction, but the evidence, another illegal term. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. So once again, it's the realization of what is hoped for and evidence of things not seen. And the New Jerusalem Bible, only faith can guarantee the blessings that we hope for. So it's the guarantee, substance in that sense, assurance, guarantee. So only faith can guarantee the blessings that we hope for, will prove the existence, so evidence, proof, another legal term, fifth one. Prove the existence of realities that are unseen. So what do you notice about this definition in relation to Jesus' biblical faith? Anything? The faith that Jesus talks about in the gospel.
It has a relationship, but it seems to be again talking more about. It seems to be moving a little bit beyond just trust in a person, but
moving towards what? Beyond trust to what?
Toward assent to.
Towards assent to something. That's right. So it's about kind of a conviction, an assurance, guarantee, a substance of things that we don't see. So you're giving an assent. And that's what theology picked up on. Theology is an intellectual assent to, well, to truths, you know. So the faith as an attitude became faith a thing, the faith, right? And then it became an intellectual assent to that faith. So you believe and accept all the truths that the church teaches. Is you're giving your intellectual assent to it. So it moved from something that was an attitude more of heart and of your whole being of trust to, without excluding that, because you have to trust in order to make the assent, it became an intellectual, more of an intellectual assent. And it's right there in the scriptures. However, if you actually look at the rest of the chapter, the whole chapter 11. Now, it does speak about, you know, what you believe in the next couple of verses. It says, by faith we know that the world, the universe, was created, set up by the Word of God, so that from what does not appear, from what is invisible, the visible came into being. So that's where this invisible part, you know, comes in. So by faith we believe that the world was created out of nothing, basically. So we believe something, some truth. So that's there. But then, right after that, he goes through verse, 20, 30 verses, going through the figures of the Old Testament who, exhibited faith. So by faith, Abel offered a sacrifice that was acceptable to God. By faith, Enoch was taken up and seen no more. By faith, Noah built the ark. By faith, Abraham obeyed. And he spends a lot of time on Abraham, and you might remember those things. By faith, Abraham left his country and his family and went to, he didn't know where he was going, he simply followed what God was asking him to do. He traversed the promised land as if, on pilgrimage through a foreign land. He had no lasting city. He was seeking a city whose builder and maker is God. So all of that shows a huge, not to imitate anybody who says huge, but it manifests a huge trust in God. All the rest of the chapter, it goes to the prophets, other judges, etc. It's all about surrender to God, not believing something, even if it's the creation of the world. Not believing something at all. So that, is really what the whole thrust of the chapter is about. And his main point being, are they just greeted from afar in faith, things hoped for? They didn't yet achieve the fullness of what they were promised. That came in Christ, that came with us. So they were all leading up to us. That's the point the author is making. But it's all these examples of trust. So we can't forget the whole rest of the chapter in focusing on that first verse. Now here's what St. Thomas Aquinas has to say about faith based on that line. Now this is in the second part of the Summa, which treats of virtue, beginning with the theological virtue. So this is question 4. And here again, faith becomes a thing. So faith, as I said, is the faith, a list of truths or a creed. Here it becomes a thing in another sense, which is equally important. Faith Faith becomes a virtue in the Aristotelian sense, which is a habit, something that we acquire, something lives in us as a quality, as a virtue, as a habit. And so it's a thing in that sense. We have faith, not just in the sense of an attitude, but as a theological virtue, which, as we later said, was infused in us in baptism, a gift of God in that sense. So we keep reifying faith. We keep making a thing out of faith. Whereas the most original, some might say the most authentic attitude towards faith is that it's an attitude of heart. It's not something, the faith, or a faith that I have that's a virtue that I have. But that is the way it did develop. And again, I'm not saying it's false. It's just intriguing to note how the meaning shifted and what the consequences will be for us as the centuries go on. Anyway, he has this to say. Whether this is a good definition of faith, St. Thomas asks. Faith is the substance of what is hoped for, and the argumentum is what came through in the Latin translation, the argument for things that do not appear, things unseen. And he goes through showing, that it is a good definition of faith. I'm just going to quote one part of his very long explanation. This is the way he treats substance. It's the substance of things we hope for. Because the first beginning of what is hoped for in us through the ascent of faith, so there you have it, it's already here, an intellectual ascent. So the very beginning, the first beginning of the things that are hoped for in us through the ascent of faith virtually contains already within it all the things that we hope for themselves. And that's an important thing that he later developed. So it's the substance of what we hope for, because as we have this quality, this gift of God in us, this virtue called faith, we have already what's hoped for, already living within us, even though it's not in full flower. These three, as St. Paul says, these three abide. Faith will pass away in the end, but faith, these abide, and the greatest of these is love. We'll come back to that in a second. So we already have the substance within us, not the full flower. You don't have fully, hope is not hope if its object is seen. But hope, but faith, it already does contain within it. We might say faith is like the gift of divine light in us. We already have seeds of that eternal light and life within us. That's one way of looking at it. So it's very, very well said on his part. In this, we hope to be beatified, and says, when we will see the truth with open vision. So you see, it develops organically into that. We already have the seed planted within us, the first fruits, the pledge, as St. Paul says. Then he says the word argument is taken for the effect of an argument. By an argument, the intellect is induced to adhere to something or someone. So here's the intellectual assent part. He takes it in the word argument. So that's where the intellect part of it comes in. That's his explanation for it. Or, as another translation has it, conviction, not argument, conviction. He admits that it's another translation. And through that, the divine authority, the intellect of the believer is convinced to assent through the divine authority. So that's where he brings in, the divine authority part. You believe God's revelation of this. You're convinced of it because God is God. So that's where that came from. So that's how that shows how that came into the tradition. The divine authority. Now, St. Augustine has a phrase that entered into medieval theology, including St. Thomas, which is quoted also in manual theology. The three types of beliefs, of credere. Credere means to believe in Latin. So you have the different aspects of faith by you. Credere Deo, credere Deum, or credere in Deum, which means you believe God, you believe that God, and you believe in God. So those are different elements of the faith, of the active faith that we've already talked about. So credere Deo means you believe God when he says this is the truth, because God is the truth, and he can neither deceive nor be deceived. So you believe God. That's the divine authority part, the conviction that this is God's truth. Credere Deum means you believe that God. In other words, that God exists, that there is a God. You know, that wasn't a problem for people. People in the ancient world didn't question whether God exists. Of course God exists. When they're asking, do you believe? But that's what credere Deum means. You believe that God is there. And credere in Deum is the original meaning of faith. You believe in God because you entrust yourself to God. You believe in God's power and by God's love in your life, and whatever else God does, including the truth that God reveals. So that's an interesting, play on the words there to show the different aspects and dimensions of faith.
St. Thomas.
What?
That's going to say Thomas.
No, St. Augustine originally, and then St. Thomas used it as it passed through Peter Lombard, who was quoted by St. Paul, etc. St. Thomas. Now, the manual theology, I read pretty much 4,000 pages of Latin, in doing my theology, and I survived. But the treatise on faith, goes through this. The nature of the act of faith, Article 1, an assent because of authority. So you assent intellectually to a truth because of the authority of God. So that goes back, to the booklet here that we're talking about. You believe all the truths because God can't be deceived and can't deceive. So this is where it comes from. It's essentially obscure in the sense it's not clear light. It's just things hoped for and that don't appear. So it is obscure, but it's certain because it's God who's telling you. So that's where some of the tension arises. It's obscure but certain. Really? Okay. And essentially free. It's a gift which you consent to. That's where the will comes in. It's a supernatural assent. It's a gift. So that's a supernatural assent. We saw that in the little booklet here already. And there's a little section on those three types of credere that I just pointed out. So that's the history then up to St. Thomas. We're giving a course now in our parish at St. Notre Dame on Dante, and in the Paradiso, in the last section of the Divine Comedy, in Canto 24, Dante is up there with the spirits and the fixed stars with Beatrice, and St. Peter comes along, and Beatrice asks Peter to examine Dante on faith. So this is what happens. Okay. So Dante says to Peter, and he refers to Paul, Father, as the truthful pen of your dear brother, Paul, wrote, that brother who with you set Rome upon the righteous road, faith is the substance of things we hope for, and is the evidence of things not seen. So as you know, as so often happens with Dante, he just quotes St. Thomas. Who quotes the letter to the Hebrews. Fede est sustanza, substance, because sperate, of things hoped for. E argumento, argument, delle non parventi, what has not appeared. So there you have it.